All right, here's another sneak peek of new capabilities coming to phase 3 of my style library. So these will be early access. There's actually a ton of these options all in one category. These are called accent overlays. Basically, they're meant to be additional animations we can add to the base style, just to, kind of change things up. But we also have the ability to add sound to them. And there's multiple options already in the library with phase 3, and I actually have more in development that I'll probably be adding over time. So we introduced transition sounds in OS7, and they're really meant to allow for a ton of different applications. So there's several applications we're going to have in these examples, but there's many more coming, and there's just a lot of flexibility in what we can do. So let me demo this first and go into a little more detail. So this is a new accent overlay, but it's actually an interactive swing capability. So it kind of combines the two features. So there's an animation, and this is actually a boomerang effect. So what will happen is when I swing the blade hard enough, there'll be an energy pulse up the blade. But this has a built-in boomerang effect, and we can actually set how long the return takes. There's the delay, etc. But in addition, there's actually unique animation sounds to each. So when I swing it, there's a sound that's going to play with the animation of the power running up the blade. When it returns, there's actually a separate sound. So we can actually, because of the way transition sounds work, we can have these animations have perfectly synced sounds, and those sounds can be unique for each individual animation. So if I swing this hard enough, you'll see there was a power surge with its own sound that went up the blade, and then after a fixed period of time, there was a return effect that actually had a different sound. So I'll try to do it without talking. And the animation itself can be whatever we want. I'm just doing kind of a white pulse up and down the blade, but there's a ton of different animations: unstable, electric, hum flicker, audio flicker, any colors you want. You can do all the different color mods to them. But we can set and choose individual sounds for each effect. You don't need to do sounds, but if you want to have a sound effect tied to it, you can. And they're always going to be in perfect sync. So the animation of the power going up the blade is in perfect sync with the sound effect of it. And then same thing, the return is in perfect sync, and it's a different sound with that return effect. So one more time, and then I'll show another example. So, and in this case, I just chose some simple sounds. Now another ability we have is something that's more kind of randomized, but this is an electric pulse that runs up the blade, and again, the animation has its own sound effect. So that little random pulse up the blade of electricity has a sound effect tied to it. And this one's just set to be an idle run. So this is kind of the opposite of a swing effect. While your blade is still, it's going to just randomly do this animation with the sound. But if I'm moving my blade around, it no longer does that effect. I have to keep it moving. As soon as I slow down, though, it's going to add the effect back. But if I keep the blade moving, it goes away. And we can set the level of movement. But the idea being this is kind of the opposite of a swing effect, in that this is an idle effect. This effect only runs while the blade's standing still, or roughly still, and then as soon as you put motion to the blade, it will actually reactivate. It'll stop the animation temporarily. And you can space this out. You can set how often it occurs. You can have it as a fixed time. This one's a random time. But these will just add to the base effect, but it also, if you add the sound, it'll also let you have additional sound effects. And they don't have to be so differently jarring. This is purposefully a much louder sound. It's actually a class sound, just so that it kind of can be shown in the demo. So that was an idle version, and then this one is kind of a similar. This has a pulse to it. So there's actually a pulse up the blade of power with its own effect and its own sound. And this one's just randomly timed. So it's getting a little washed out on camera, but there's actually a full pulse of color that runs up this blade. And it's randomly timed with a little bit more space in it, but you can just add any of these overlays to add to your base effect, and then if you want the sounds, you would set up the transition sound to work with it. And there's so many more options I have. These are just a few quick examples. But everything can be done with or without the sound effects. But if you add the sound effects, they will always be perfectly timed to that animation. So, and they can be any sounds you want. So I chose some basic sounds that would come up well. But you can develop any sounds you want. You can have, sound of electricity. You can have sounds of like a fireball. You can have sounds of like a water effect. You can just have kind of like a surge of power. It's really the whole thing with transition sounds is they can be anything you want. It's a generic capability that can be used multiple times in multiple places. So we can take, it's basically like an open slot for sound effects that will always be in perfect sync with whatever animation we add to them. And they're virtually limitless in what we can do with them. And we really only kind of scratched the surface. We kind of dipped our toe in the pool in phase 1 and 2. In phase 3, I'm taking a full-on cannonball in the deep end with what we're going to do with transition sounds as well as all the other new sound effects. And this is just kind of the start of it, but a ton more coming. I'm going to do a demo video of the options in the library just so you can see how many capabilities are already there. But there's so much more coming, so hope you enjoy.
All right, so this is covering phase 3 of my style library. This is yet another new feature I've done a demo on, and there's actually so many options. The demo was just kind of scratching the surface. So I wanted to show all the options available, how we control it, how we set it up. So I'm going to start with a basic blade style again, just so we can see the animations and everything. And then we're in the enhancement screen. And what these are is they're going to be the base style accent overlays. So these are essentially, it's just a layer of animation we're going to add over the top of our base style. So right now we've got a rotoscope style. And what we can do is we can add some kind of animation, and there's a ton of options available. And then that'll just further enhance the base style. So it gives you kind of a unique animation, lets you really play around with it. This is also set up so you can have multiple different ways to use these. So you can have it so that you have a style option. What that is for edit mode and or ProffieOS Workbench, or also via style arguments through the config helper tool. You can actually set up a style that has multiple accent overlays, but then pick which one you want on each preset. So if you want to use this same style for 3 or 4 or more presets, you could actually set up the base style and then using edit mode, select the different overlays you want to run in each preset so that it creates a brand new version of that style, something unique to that preset. Also has all the edit mode colors and everything, but this does use style option 3. So if you were to add some multiple options to this, and want to control it via edit mode or the workbench, you would use style option 3 by sending out multiple of the overlays. For our purposes, I'm going to only build a single one. This also has the ability to tie into special abilities, which actually there's a lot more coming with that later. But if you wanted to, you could also set it so that the various special abilities turn off or toggle these various overlays. So there's going to be a lot more uses for these. But this is the start point. So I'm going to do a simple setup, but I just wanted to point out that you can actually add multiple overlays and then choose between them using style option 3. So let's start with something simple. We'll start with a power surge. And what this is there's going to be an animation that continuously runs over the top. Now, how it runs is going to be what we set up. So we can choose, you can obviously choose if you want it to have be a full blade. This will run just like a 3/4 blade. You can run a half blade. And all that is it's defining the area that the animation occurs in. So this would be a quarter blade would be like an emitter type effect. But we'll run full blade. You can have it be just a timed loop. So this just runs on a fixed time, which is controlled here. And then so the loop delay, this is the speed of the animation. And this is the delay between. So if we extend the delay, you'll see it takes a little longer to run. And then we can also have it so it runs a little slower, a little faster. If you set it to 0, it uses auto time based on the sound, only if you have sound enabled. If you don't have sound enabled, don't set it to 0 because then there's no animation. But let's tighten that up a little bit. There's also the ability to set it up. Let's make that a little faster. That looks a little too slow. It's probably too fast. But we can also do a random loop. And what that means is the time between is actually randomly selected up to your loop delay. So the maximum delay is what you set, but then it could randomly speed up or slow down. But this just gives you more randomness to it. You obviously can control the color. So if we do, we can set, we're using alt color 3 for this. If I wanted it to be white, I can set that up. If I didn't like the surge, I wanted maybe say an unstable effect, I could do an unstable bolt. So basically a surge is going to be, so a flash is what it sounds like. So this would be a flash. So it's going to flash on the blade a few times. We could do surge, which is a overrun of power. We could do a bolt, which runs up the blade, kind of like a lightning bolt effect. We've got a wave, which creates a wave along the blade. And then a ripple is really just a little bit smaller wave. And then we've got a spark, which is a much smaller spark that'll run up. And you could still do tweaking on all of these. But so I'm going to keep let's keep a wave. Let's do an unstable wave. So this effect runs up it now. On top of that, and choosing a random loop, we can also do idle loops. So like an idle random loop, what that means, oops, I'll have to fix that bug. There are a couple bugs that I'll get fixed up. So we'll show the idle loop a little later. So this is still, I'm almost done developing. Obviously, there's still a few bugs I'll get fixed. So don't worry if you see a bug in this demo. By the time this launches, those will be fixed. But what we have now is we can activate different sounds. So a transition sound is determined by the number. And when you generate the style code, it's going to tell you what you've chosen. But if you add a transition sound, what that means is every time this animation runs, it's going to play the transition sound, which is the TR and then whatever numbers you select. The library is automatically going to keep track of all transition sounds you set up, and it's going to assign them sequentially. But you can always change that. So say you have a font that has a lot of different transition sounds and you already know you want to use a specific one, you can also just set the number. If you set the number, the library is going to basically no longer automatically update this. If I leave this alone and I add other transition sounds, it's going to reorder them sequentially based on the effect's priority. So just so you know, if you set a few different transition sounds in multiple layers, it's going to keep changing that number. When you finally generate the style code, the library will tell you what transition sound is attached to each of the different effects you've chosen. Just because transition sounds are actually intended to be a very generic sound that you can use multiple times over. So you can have multiple different transition sounds within a style. Each one can be completely different and independent, and they're all controlled by the style code. But you have to name the file accordingly to what the style is telling the OS it's going to run. If you're missing the sounds, then this obviously wouldn't work correctly. You don't need sounds, though, if you don't want them. But these are automatically timed to this individual animation. So when this animation starts, this sound will run with it. All right. And then on top of that, we've got a few other options, obviously being able to change the color, etc. We can invert it. So we can have it so that it runs backwards. We can also have it so it runs out. So this will be a mirrored out, so it'll come from the middle and go out, and then obviously mirror in. So on top of just all of the options we have here, which are already quite a few, and I'll have more coming, and we'll talk about a few more of these in a second, you can also modify them further with the style mod. So normal is going to always basically run from the hilt up, but you can invert that, you can mirror it, etc. You can also, like I said, the other option we can do now too is we can do an interactive swing effect. What's going to happen then is now the animation will only run and the sound will only run when you do a swing. So when I swing, it'll do that. Now the reason these are a little separate from the responsive swing effects is because of that transition sound. So these work a little differently, but essentially it's the same mechanism. So if you set up an interactive swing, you don't really want a swing effect, because you're going to end up with multiple effects triggering at the same time. The overlays will react to your swing, but they carry with them the ability to do the transition sound. The basic responsive swing effects do not have that ability. So even though it seems similar, these are actually very different things. On top of that, we also have the boomerang effect, which I showed. So we could do it. Let's do a wave boomerang. So what this does now, a boomerang effect basically goes out and comes back, and it'll actually have two separate sounds. It'll have a sound for going out, and then there's this return sound option. And you can choose, it'll automatically, like I said, number them sequentially. If you wanted it to be the same sound, so the same sound as it goes out comes in, you would just change this to match. But if I wanted a different sound, and again, you can always change these, I can actually have a unique sound for the return. So what that would mean, if I had two sounds set up, when the first effect goes out, it plays one sound. When the return or the boomerang effect triggers, it'll actually play a separate sound. So in my demo, I had that set up. So one sound played with the going out, and a different sound, because I wanted to make it sound like it was coming back, was played with the return. But you set that here, and again, the style code, when you generate it, will tell you which sounds are tied to which effect. But so this is set for interactive swing on a boomerang. What that means is when I swing, it's going to generate the outward effect. And then there's a return delay active for when that return happens. So we'll swing, there goes my effect, and then basically a second later it'll return, etc. So you can have it so that you do these interactive swings with a boomerang effect and it comes back. We can also set the boomerang effect on a random loop so that it'll go out, come back, just random times between. But the time for the return is controlled here. So even though it's on a random for the loop, the return delay is always whatever amount you set here. And this just is another new effect. And again, if you ran this, what will happen is every time the animation goes this way, it'll play this sound. And every time it comes back the other way, it'll run that sound. And we've got a bunch of other ones. We've got like electricity. So if you wanted to do like an electric ripple, or that shows wave. So these are just slightly different animations. We could do a hump flicker. So just lots and lots of different options. You can play around with them. You can play with your colors. Now, if we wanted to, we can also apply color options. So I did show the invert and all that. You can also apply something like a color shift. So if we wanted to do like a rotating color shift, and let's get a color other than white, because white doesn't really shift that much. But now we've got kind of an orange effect. But as it moves, it's actually going to shift, and we can kind of show that with a little change here and maybe speed up the shift. So let's slow her down so we can see what's happening. So you see as it moves, that color, I really made it super slow on purpose, but as it moves, it's actually changing color. That's using the shift capability and the time for the shift. So there's a lot of different things you can apply to all of these effects to really make something completely unique. And again, that ability to tie a transition sound to that effect really makes it great. And you can run the timings, you can run the delays as much as you want. The idea is to have this run over the top of your bass style just as something else, just to give it a unique animation. Again, give it unique sounds, give it unique abilities. So if we were to put this as kind of more like a surge of electricity, let's speed her up a little bit. So that might be too fast to see. That's a little bit better, but this will just run, and these can be applied to any styles you want. So you can just apply multiple different types of overlays on top of everything. Choose the options. You can have some that run random. You can have some, I'll get the idle loop fixed. So with the idle loop, once I fix it, what that means is it's technically the opposite of a swing. So when your blade is standing still, the animation happens. But if you're moving your blade around, it actually stops the animation. So that's what the idle effects are, is it's a random loop or a timed loop only while your blade is basically being held still. Once you start to have some kind of swing, if it's small movements, it doesn't count. But once you have some kind of swing action to it, it will actually not play that animation. And if you have the sound, it won't play that sound. So that way, the idea being, if you wanted to have, while you're using the saber with a smooth swing, you don't necessarily want those sound effects or those other animations to run. So I just had to fix the bug you saw pop up, but that'll be available too at launch. But there's so many controls. There's so many different options in here. As you can see, looking through all of this stuff, there's a lot of different ways you can apply the color stuff. So all of this will allow you to really customize what that overlay looks like. And then again, having that ability to have the perfectly synchronized sound is the other big piece. So if you add those TR sounds, the transition sounds, you can actually have it so that these animations get their own unique effect, both visually and with the sound effect. And again, they run always sync together. The animation and the sound are tied together in the style code, so they will always run perfectly on time, perfectly together. But there's a ton more coming. This list is actually quite exhaustive, but I actually do have more in development. I kind of had to draw a line in the sand and say if I don't stop adding new options, I'll never get this finished. But over time, I will add to this. I do have a few other types coming in, a few of these other options for loops in the works, etc. So there will be a lot more added to this section. This section is really flexible. It's really meant to just really give you a lot of unique customization you can apply. But there's a lot coming. But when phase 3 launches, this will be generally what you see. I might do a few more fixes and a couple of additions, but this is how you'll get your different accent overlays. And there's probably thousands of things you can do just with what you see in front of you to really make that blade your own. So hope you enjoy.